Beyond the headlines. This is World Insight.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Iranian Foreign Minister Syed Abbas Araghchi has met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on Wednesday. During this talk, a minister from Iran briefed the Chinese side on the latest Iran-U.S. negotiations and Iran's likely next steps, insisting the political crisis cannot be resolved through military means. For his part, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi outlined China's principled stance and four-point proposal for stability. He brought up global calls to restore safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Yet with peace far from certain and the Strait of Hormuz still a crucial pressure point, the core question remains, what will it take to pull back from the brink? Let's loop in today's panelists. Joining us in Beijing in the studio, Baocheng Liu, Director of the Center for International Business Ethics from the University of International Business and Economics. And meanwhile, also joining us in Shanghai from China, Wang Jin, a Middle East expert. We are also hoping during our conversation today, we are going to have an Iranian expert joining us in no moment. But first of all, let me go to you, Professor Wang Jin. As an expert from China on the Middle East, what do you think are the most important messages delivered by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi to his Iranian counterpart this time?
Well, I think the message sent by China is very important. On the one hand, we cannot forget it's a bilateral meeting. So it actually shows that the bilateral relations between China and Iran are still solid, and the bilateral trust between each other are still very strong. And also, on the other hand, we cannot forget that the meeting of Araghchi, the Iran foreign minister, came to China as a very, very crucial moment when we know that everybody is focusing on the latest developments, particularly the relations between Iran and the United States. So that's why Iran's foreign minister's visit shows that Iran hopes and trust towards China over the possible peaceful contribution for the future improvement over the peaceful opportunities between Iran and the United States. And also, if we read the statement, joint statement released by both sides, Iran cherishes Chinese contributions towards the peace process and also highlights that the peaceful points that released by Chinese side, particularly by Chinese President Xi Jinping, the so-called 4 points of the latest situation over Iran, actually it's welcomed and praised by Iran and other regional countries. So it shows China's contribution, and it shows that China would continue to contribute to the very, very active and constructive role in the future for the facilitating the peace opportunities between Iran and United States and try to alleviate the tension in this region.
Joining us now, also in Tehran, Iran, Syed Mohammad Marandi, Professor of Literature and Orientalism with Tehran University. Earlier, you heard your Chinese counterpart trying to illustrate what he believes as the most important messages coming out of the bilateral meeting between the two foreign ministers. Now, to you, Professor Marandi, I would love to hear how the Iranian side is digesting messages coming from the Chinese side. To you, what have been the most important messages that the Iranian side heard from your counterpart?
I think what we've been seeing in the relationship over the past few years in particular has been a rapid improvement and strengthening of ties. And in this trip, the Chinese colleagues in the foreign ministry and other officials have been telling the Iranians that Iran's stature across the world has grown after this illegal invasion by the United States and the Israeli regime. And this will enhance Iran's position in future and enable greater economic ties and cooperation. Both sides, though, want to resolve the crisis. And the crisis was, as everyone acknowledges, brought about by the United States and the Israeli regime, Netanyahu and Trump. The best way forward is for the United States to end the siege on the Persian Gulf region, as well as to impose a ceasefire and end the slaughter of Lebanese and Gazan Palestinian civilians, and so that the Strait of Hormuz can be opened. The world needs the Strait of Hormuz. It needs its energy, and it cannot be held hostage by Trump and Netanyahu.
Right. Professor Morandi, we all understand from the news that both Iran and the United States have set the so-called red line on the Strait of Hormuz. Now, given the rhetoric war that we have seen from the very beginning of this war, the U.S. Israeli war against Iran, tell me more about what do you think is the reality on the ground, or shall I say on the water, right now, despite all of the rhetorics coming from both sides and multiple sides?
Well, the reality is that the United States and the Israeli regime launched the war to undermine Iran and to gain control over West Asia. And they failed. And of course, that attempt was also carried out in order to be able to control energy resources and take the rest of the world hostage, to be very blunt about it. But this failure led to a change in policy in Tehran. Tehran has said that in future will no longer allow the United States to use the Persian Gulf as a platform for aggression. And thus Iran is forced to take control of the Strait of Hormuz. And that is an irreversible decision. And the United States wants to allow ships linked to the 5 countries that assisted it in carrying out this war, meaning Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, and the Emirates, their ships to pass through and block Iranian ships from using the strait. Iran says that is not possible. Iran, of course, has never blocked the Strait of Hormuz. Friendly countries that did not participate in this war have been using it, like China, like Russia, Iraq, and others, Pakistan. Their ships have been passing through, but Iran is saying that the United States must end this war, must end the violence from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, and it must end the siege. And that is not something difficult for Trump to do, but in his imperial ambitions, that is very, within the framework of those imperial ambitions, it is very hard for him to swallow them.
Okay. Well, to the Chinese side, Professor Wang Jin, your thoughts on this, particularly given the fact that the Chinese President Xi Jinping has already provided the 4-point proposal. Of course, these proposals are policy strategic proposal, such as peaceful coexistence, national sovereignty, international rule of law, and development and security should be coordinated. All these are principles. How do you think China can, with its ever more significant role in trying to resolve this conflict, be able to bring these principles into real actions? In other words, how much content is China really contributing, as some of the media reports been asking, to the overall peace process, if there is any?
Well, you asked a very crucial question because we have to clarify that on the one hand, the so-called 4-point proposal is very crucial, is very critical, because at the very moment right now is United States and Iran and maybe the other regional countries, given that the conflict and the tensions are still ongoing, different sides to some extent behave irrationally. So it means that it is very urgent right now and highly necessary right now that these countries should be brought back to the rational and the restraint measure. So that's why the 4-point proposal, if we read it very carefully, as you mentioned, they highlight different aspects. For example, the coexistence peacefully, and highlights the importance of the sovereignty and independence and respecting the international laws and the regulations. Of course, last but not least is that coordinated security and development. Right. These principles are the very, very rational aspects for different countries and for different sides. And also, on the other hand, we have to say that China actually contribute a lot. For example, call for the conflicting parties to keep rational, and also together with other regional countries, we have to say that Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt and other regional countries to contribute much more peaceful opportunities for different conflicting parties, particularly between United States and Iran. So that's why I think China's contribution could be very clearly witnessed, and that's why China's role is highly praised and welcomed by the regional countries, including Iran.
Professor Liu, as an economy expert, tell me more about, the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, we understand is such an important point for the world's transportation, for energy, for the infrastructure, and for the supply chains worldwide. How long do you think that is a debate going on for a long time, that other parties can still provide a time space for the directly involved parties to come to an agreement and to open the Strait of Hormuz?
Yeah, so the world are really facing enough challenges now. The addition of the difficulties and from time to time the obstruction of the Strait of Hormuz is really hurting the global economic performance, because after all, it is really a passage for more than 20% of the global energy, not to mention many other goods and services. So therefore, the whole world are really looking for a peaceful settlement where both sides can really, as Mr. Wang has mentioned, come to a rational table to really maintain dialogue. The fact that China is really bringing up the four principles is they're trying to really to pacify the situation, but of course, there needs to be a clear roadmap based on the basic mutual trust or the universal trust or regional trust that is there. And so, but over the history, the trust is not yet available, or at least is not really adequate for.
So what does it mean for all the other economies?
To engage. For other economies, I think they need to really to look at their own economic situation, avoid entanglement into the complexities, and now they try to be a more constructive actors if they really want to involve the Gulf countries, and also by maintaining basic principles through the smooth passage of the Hormuz. So the more of the economic trade and investment can really take place to benefit their people. So that's the most important point.
Professor Morandi, my final question, if you can, within a minute. Now, we all understand there are important meetings bilaterally and also about geopolitics likely to take place in the coming week. Here in the Chinese capital, we've been hearing some important leaders coming from different countries are visiting China, or to visit China from different sources. Now, how do you expect this issue likely to play out in front of the agenda of those discussions?
I think the Iranians and the Chinese have sat together and explained to one another the situation and expanded the coordination with one another. I think we all understand that this is an issue of aggression. The Iranians have not been emotional at any level. This was unprovoked. This is the second war that's been imposed upon us unprovoked in less than a year. Mm-hmm. And our leaders have been murdered, our school children have been murdered, our hospitals have been bombed, and the United States has failed to win the war. And ultimately, the United States is going to have to accept behaving like a normal country. The hope is that Chinese leaders can convince the United States that war is not a solution, and that Iran's rights will have to be respected, because Iran has shown on the battlefield that it is capable of preserving its sovereignty and defending its rights.
Even though we are seeing images of militaries in action, we really hope that can be a place of peace. Thank you so much, Professor Morandi, Professor Liu Baocheng, and Professor Wang Jin. Appreciate it. Coming up in the program, Japan's military ambitions beyond the nation's pacifist constitution. A closer look.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Mom, were there 7?
Yes, darling. There were 7 bombs.
Mom, can I sleep now?
Yes. Tonight, there were only 7.
More than 3 million people are now temporarily displaced.
About 35% of the displaced are children, are terrified about being caught up in these attacks.
1 apple, 2 monkeys, 3 elephants, 4 dogs, 5 stars.
Most children learn to count with the nice things in life, but some have to count to the sound of their world in ruins.
Sweet dreams, honey. Tomorrow, we count something else.
Children will learn no matter what. But the question is, will the grown-ups?
Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Large-scale protests swept across Japan on the 3rd of May to oppose Prime Minister Sake Takaichi's push to revise the country's pacifist constitution. An estimated 50,000 people gathered at Tokyo Rinkai Disaster Prevention Park to support the country's existing constitution and to oppose changes to its Article 9, a clause that renounces war and imposes limits on the country's military. If you take a closer look at the news from Japan, you will also notice all of these. Earlier this week, Japan fired Type 88 surface-to-ship missiles from Philippine territory during the Balikatan exercises. That is the first time since World War II that Japanese forces have launched offensive missiles overseas. Last month, the Japanese government formally revised the 3 principles on the arms transfer to permit exports of lethal weapons, including offensive weapons, missiles, and frigates to the Philippines. And Japan's 2026 defense budget has exceeded 9 trillion yuan, reaching 2% of GDP, a 14-year consecutive increase, while the government has imposed new taxes to the public to fund this military buildup. Japan has been accelerating its military expansion ambition under Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. Particularly, the attempt to change the country's constitution is worrisome to many. All these have put Japan's neighboring countries, especially those that were invaded, occupied, tortured, and germ warfared by the Japanese military during World War II, on alert. Though Asia has been the continent that has enjoyed a war-free era for decades, many are always watching closely about where Japan is heading for, because unlike Germany, the Japanese government has never officially apologized to the victims and admitted its war crimes during World War II. The latest moves by the current Japanese administration only stirs up more concerns in the region as the unhealed wounds of history live on.
Zoom in on global affairs with insightful debates and exclusive interviews. This is World Insight.
So joining us to talk about that in Beijing, Liu Baocheng, once again, director from the Center of International Business Ethics with University of International Business and Economics. In Singapore, Alexis Dudden, professor of history with University of Connecticut. And in Malaysia, Peter T.C. Chan, former deputy director with the Institute of China Studies of University of Malaya. Welcome to all of you. Now, Mr. Chan, you are based in Asia. You know what earlier the introduction to the story we were talking about. So tell me more about your thoughts about Japan's recognizing its self-defense forces as a military force and also even acquire lately, quote, counter-strike capabilities. What does that mean for people in this region?
Let me begin by saying that, for us in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, Japan has been a crucial partner for us in the decades after the World War II, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Japan has played a tremendous role in trying to bring us, in helping us, Malaysia and Southeast Asia, to where we are today in terms of manufacturing and economic. Japan's turn lately in trying to revise its constitution is a very disturbing turn of event for us in Southeast Asia. We have always known Japan as very reliable, predictable, because of its pacifist constitution, because of its economic power. Now that it's taking on a military trajectory is a really unsettling development for us. So the recent development right now, even with the launch of the missiles in the Philippines, shows that Japan's defense posture is no longer just defensive. It has got a legal right now for first strike, and it's probably not going to just retain within Japanese soil. It's going to project itself as it happened in the Philippines right now in Southeast Asia. For us in Malaysia and ASEAN, we have always been very concerned that our region could be used as a theater for great power rivalry. Japan's latest move underscores that concern that we face here.
I see. Go to you, Professor Daden. We understand Asahi Shimbun, for example, a Japanese media, of course, did a recent survey. 63% of respondents believe Article 9 should not be changed, while only 30% support revision. Of course, in Japan, there are different political tendencies in different groups that, survey are being done but tell me more about how do you see from outside this region what is going on lately in Japan, particularly with its military ambition. How much of alarm does it ring?
So I think these are excellent questions, and I appreciate my colleague in Malaysia for raising, Japan for so long has been regarded as helpful. And from a Southeast Asia perspective, again, I'm in Singapore, Japan holds still this position as trustworthy. The trick is, and I'll come to your question really quickly, but the trick is when it makes mistakes, when the government makes mistakes about what happened 80 years ago, when it denies historical atrocities, you raised the issue of germ warfare, when it exculpates itself from the atrocities committed on the Malaysian Peninsula, throughout Singapore, etc., then people don't understand what Japan doesn't get about its responsibility in the region. And then fast forward to the immediate present, in which a conversation that's been going on since the Constitution went into effect in 1947 on May 3rd, is that there's a force in Japan that has always regarded Article 9, the denial to be able to commit war abroad, as, and I'm quoting from them, masochistic. It's denied Japan its masculine tendency. And it's a very strange perception, because it seems in this regard that there's these forces that from the very beginning now have the oxygen in the room. Now they are saying it's our turn. We want Japan to be able to flex its muscles outside Japanese territory. This is a debate that's been ongoing in Japan for a very long time, but the important thing I think for all of us to bear in mind is how this procedure, how constitutional revision would happen in Japan, 2/3 majority required in both houses of parliament, followed by a national referendum. As you mentioned, most Japanese actually don't want this change. Every year, there is a 50-50, is Article 9 really the right thing for us? And most Japanese are unsure about what Article 9 actually is. Japan has the right to defend itself. It always has. But the overwhelming majority of Japanese do not want to wage war outside Japan's borders. Right. And that's where Takaichi, current Prime Minister Takaichi, sees herself as the inheritor of former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, who wanted to just change this posture for Japan and reinvigorate, normalize Japan to be able to wage war outside its borders. But that is not the majority of Japanese people.
Right. Go to you, Professor Liu, here in the studio. We understand some politicians always are opportunistic. Therefore, they would take whatever is the kind of oxygen, so to speak, in the room, particularly given the fact that there has been a lot of geopolitics and uncertainties around the world. But how wrong are they? Many would wonder, given what we are reading from the survey by a Japanese press, that they would take an opportunity as they see today. And what would that mean for the future of Japan, not only in the eyes of the other, but also in the real concrete interests of Japan's economy and Japan's future?
The older generation, particularly after the Second World War, clearly remembered the scars, not only the scorched onto other nations, other people, but on themselves in particular. But now there has been a grand shift of the paradigm in their demographics. So now particularly since Shinzo Abe, the smoke is really smoldering with regard to raise their global identity. Yes, that's fine if that is done technologically and economically, but now the military might is now trying to seize, as you mentioned, the opportunity to fish in the troubled water when global geopolitics are really in a complex situation, and particularly now the White House that is led by Donald Trump to play isolism. So now they found that this is really an opportunity for them to beef up their military might, and particularly to increase the military expenditure, and now attempts to revise the Article 9 is really a very dangerous move that they need really to recount the global history and also their own history of development, how they can really, what really fit they can really bring to their own people.
And that is all the time we have for today. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us.